Welcome to Measuring Up. Measuring Up is a video series that was created last year at the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission. The purpose of the video series is really to highlight the perspectives of leading executives, practitioners from all kinds of backgrounds, corporate world, agency background, academia, and really come together to talk about what's ahead in measurement and evaluation. Last year's inaugural episode uh, was a special one. It was where I partnered with the guest that I have today, Mark Weiner, to talk about what was happening amidst the COVID-19 crisis and how it was going to change public relations and communications. It really created a lot of momentum for not only the series but also the Measurement Commission. And I'm so grateful to have Mark Weiner back today, who is now appointed to being the Chief Insights Officer at Cognito, leading Cognito Insights, and who also he's been very busy. He has a new book called PR Technology, Data, and Insights, with a subtitle of Igniting a Positive Return on Your Communications Investment. He also has a wide range of additional thought leadership that is being released. One that I've been exposed to is a communicator's guide to excellence as it pertains to measurement and evaluation, which he is releasing in partnership with the Measurement Commission at IPR. So we have a lot to talk about, Mark. Welcome to the first episode of 2021.
Well, thanks for inviting me back. Thanks for your friendship. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, Mark. It's great to have you on. So I think, Mark, to do justice to all the work that you've been doing, and also to address many of the questions that the public relations and corporate communications ecosystem has about your new book, let's start there. So again, PR, technology, data, and insights. Um, Mark, at least in the description of the book, we're all excited to read it. But you describe how data technology and insights have forever changed public relations and corporate communications as functions. And you talk about this notion of failing to adapt to these evolutions as being more a matter of willingness to adapt rather than ability to adapt. And this is a very interesting point that you make in the description of the book. So, Mark, can you talk a little bit about why this failure to adapt really exists? Why wouldn't the PR function, the corporate communications leaders, have a willingness to adapt to these areas of data technology and insights?
Well, technology has always been a part of public relations, and some aspects of the technology are more easily adaptable than others. So if you go back in time, telephone, typewriter, those are forms of technology,
Hmm.
but they've evolved. So while technology has always been a part of public relations, there's certain aspects that have been more challenging. Now, in particular, I'm describing in that statement technology related to public relations research and evaluation. So I think people have adapted very well to press release distribution technology, media database technology, elements that do what technology is supposed to do in making work easier, more accessible, and faster. The question about technology as it relates to research and evaluation is probably a deeper question, more about underlying issues related to this topic than it is to technology generally. There's an experience I had years ago where I assumed that everybody measured, everybody in public relations did research because it's in every textbook, and Edward Bernays was a social scientist. So there's an element of research that's baked into public relations and its history. And this experience a few years ago was at I think it was a PRSA reception. And as I said, I just assumed that everybody measured. They just didn't want to talk to me about it. And in this conversation, this agency CEO, whose clients included names and brands you recognize, measurement-oriented companies, he said to me as an aside, a passing remark, "We would never measure. I would gladly forego being a proven success in exchange for never being a proven failure." And then he left to go to the bar. And I was standing there realizing that his statement was the answer that I had been missing. That not only did people not measure, and it certainly wasn't about me. It was that they chose not to, and they chose not to. And I think the principal motivation was fear, so that the fear of being a failure was greater than whatever upside potential that research can provide. Now, that may be true to a degree, that realizing through research that a program underperformed is unpleasant, but it's a moment. And the alternative is more like ongoing dull pain, where you never really know what's working, what's not working, if you're succeeding, if you're not succeeding. And the final part of it, as an agency CEO, he was also responding in a way to what his client expected and required of him and the agency. So in a way, the client was enabling that behavior by never holding the agency truly accountable. Now, last point on this is that while there are still a lot of PR people who do not measure, who choose not to, and are kind of stuck, their corporate clients have evolved. And whether you're working in internal public relations or with an external client, the CMO or the CCO or the CEO of that organization has moved on from where they were years ago. They have MBAs. They understand that everything has to connect to a business outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so this tide is changing as new leadership emerges in corporate communications too, where this is just expected.
Mm-hmm. And, I would argue, to your point, Mark, that there's more pressure than ever before for the public relations and communications practitioner to adapt in this way, to, as I've learned from you, to speak the language of business. And it's not just about the technology. It's a larger kind of philosophical shift. Um, you know, this sort of shift to quantification of results, this shift to evaluation in a way that makes sense not just to the PR and comms function, but also to finance, to HR, to operations, et cetera. It's a really important shift that I think you're describing. Mark, in your book, you describe the benefits of these areas of investing and further investigating technology, data, and insights in public relations to largely be ROI, reduce reputational risk, and what you describe as optimal efficiency. So, can you describe, Mark, or perhaps elaborate on how PR and comms efforts can be approached, can be instrumented in a way that creates these outcomes, and maybe you can also share a little bit about the magnitude of these outcomes that you know the uh, the CCOs of the world can expect. So if they're coming into a new role, trying to create these outcomes, uh, you know, is it a sort of a nominal ROI that they can expect to generate for their business? Is it uh, to some extent, reducing reputational risk or improving efficiencies, or if these areas are approached in a meaningful and thoughtful way, should they expect more? Can you share a little bit more about your perspective in these areas, Mark?
Yes. The foundation for what you're describing in aligning public relations with the business begins with data. Now, I've been a judge for years in awards competitions where, despite very specific instruction on the award submission application for data, there's still a preponderance of objective setting statements that sound like generate significant buzz or break through the media clutter. And these are not measurable. They're indeterminate, vague references that can't be proven as to whether you succeeded or not. Whereas data is the language of the boardroom. So if we're going to talk about public relations performance, number one, we have to work in it, and hopefully we all do, work in an environment that supports data-informed decision-making, whether this data reflects success or underperformance. It's a gauge, and the only way to improve is to know where you need to improve and then act upon it. So so number one is the data, and the implications for that data and the potential for that data to lead to business outcomes can only be unleashed by having the data to begin with. Now, some of the resistance comes from the notion that data somehow inhibits creativity, and public relations is still perceives itself as largely creative and writing skills and relationship oriented, and that's all true. But data enables, and the technology that delivers that data enables us to do better work, more creative campaigns on the elements that matter most based on what stakeholders prefer. So when we talk about the magnitude of the outcome, it can be large or small, and there's examples of both. You mentioned the 3 return on investment elements that are in the book. The first is the sexy one, and that's PR's ability to quantify an impact on revenue generation. So people immediately go to that as that's the ROI metric, but it's not the only one. It's sexy, it's achievable, more achievable now than ever, but it's still limited in what PR can actually deliver compared to mass market advertising or price promotions or whatever. The second element is efficiency, and efficiency means doing more with less and for less. So it means that creative solution may be achieved faster and more accurately than it would if you continue to, test and retest and refine that way. So the wonderful thing about efficiency is that it's the most accessible of all these ROI metrics. Simply by, and I'm sure people do this every day, they make a choice to invite this auto journalist to the test drive, but not that one. Or they return this phone call first, or they focus their attention on one media outlet over another. That's the good part. Everybody's doing it already. They just don't think of it as an ROI element. But doing those things, making something as simple as media frequency, clip counting. If you have a budget of $1,000 and you can generate 100 stories for that $1,000, that's maybe fine. But if you can generate 200 stories for that $1,000, you've just doubled the return on that investment if the number of story placements is your measure. The downside, if it's even a downside, is that the potential return on those decisions is only a fraction of what is probably already a small PR budget. So if you can save 5% by being more efficient, it's 5% of what is a relatively small number to begin with. That's the only downside to it. But over time, you can show, and I think any CEO would recognize the value of improving performance, a return on the dollar invested in PR. The third element is avoiding catastrophic cost. You called it reputation risk. And that is probably the least frequent. And if we're lucky, we never have to encounter it. But you can look at recent history to see that certain companies have gotten themselves into difficult situations that had a primary impact on the market capitalization of those companies. So when things go wrong and they're widely publicized, as sometimes they are, the implications are for billions of dollars of market cap. So in terms of PR's ability to generate revenue, the sales connection, you might be able to attribute millions of dollars. Revenue retention or efficiency it could be in the thousands of dollars. Catastrophic cost can be in the billions, and it can take years or decades to recover if these companies even recover at all. So that's the landscape.
And Mark, there's such a wide range of situations. In my experience, for example, um, when there is sort of a nominal effort invested in these areas of data insights and technology for the PR and comms function, um, sometimes there's some level of disappointment around why it didn't do more for the communications or public relations leader. In other cases, and I'll talk about a project that I just completed about 3 months ago, working with a financial services company. For them, investments in data insights and technology, it led to significant outcomes. It was the difference between being uninvited to meetings with the C-suite because there was a sort of a perception that this function was a cost center, not a profit center. And
Mhm.
once that perception that no, this can actually in a demonstrable way impact the business positively, there was actually a proactive desire to use public relations and communications as a lever. And that sort of quantification, it changed actually the role of the CCO in this case, from from simply somebody who was perceived as uh, trying to bolster the company's reputation externally to a very, very, very different role. In fact, the CEO of this company said, "You're not just a communications leader; you're a stakeholder leader. You're responsible for not just you know uh, the external world, but also the internal world. And this has dramatic impacts on not only our revenues and our profits, but also our costs and uh, and in this particular instance, it changed so much. I mean, this CCO went from having as you describe, a small PR budget to start with, especially around measurement, to I think there was a 3 or 4 x increase in their budget and a lot more integration of communications efforts into the core business. So I think there's a wide range of situations here, but when done well, I've seen the magnitude of impact to be there. And I would say if you're not seeing a magnitude of impact, there's probably something left to optimize. Moving on to another topic, Mark, you also describe some incredible case studies in your book with brands that have pioneered innovative, business-focused public relations and communications efforts. So this raises a question that I'm very interested to get your perspective on. For organizations that need to undergo a material transformation and modernization of the PR and comms function, Mark, how much time or effort or resources does it take to complete that change in general? This is probably another uh, sort of topic that it really depends on a variety of different factors. But for example, can a newly appointed CCO who's maybe coming into a brand that's been around for a long time, but has also not particularly focused on PR and communications measurement, insights, and evaluation, if they really apply the blueprint from your book and the philosophies that you prescribe, can they expect uh, the outcomes in, a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, more? How long does this kind of modernization and transformation effort take in your experience?
Well, I think there's a misconception, first of all, that research and evaluation has to be complicated, has to be time consuming and expensive, and it doesn't have to be. My mantra for this is begin simply, simply begin. Because even if that CCO is working for a Fortune 50 company, this transformation has to begin somewhere. And it begins with committing fully to a process. And I think, in my experience, a data informed process is more likely to succeed than one that is based on gut instinct or past experience alone. Uh, I've worked on situations where a particular need was revealed and resolved within a week. This was a case of potential catastrophic cost, where a company uh, a company CEO declared publicly that they would never decrease the dividend, and then certain events unfolded, and within weeks, it was revealed that they might have to reduce the dividend after he made this public statement. So the CEO assembled his PR team and the legal team and the IR team to understand what all this could mean. The legal team just said, "Say nothing. You don't need to." And the PR teams provided guidance about a more contextual approach. The CEO was thorough. We did an analysis of 6 companies in that category, each of whom had missed earnings and had to face a reduction of dividends. And what we saw is that in the first 2 weeks after the announcement, all 6 of these companies saw a decline in market cap. But the companies who were more forthright and proactive in providing context about what was happening and why it was happening and what the company was doing about it saw their share price return relatively quickly. And on average, by the end of the 12-month period following that announcement, the stock price had risen, I think, 8% on average. The companies who had taken the legal advice and said nothing, one of them went out of business, and the others just never recovered in terms of share price. So while this was not cause and effect, the CEO had seen enough directional guidance to take the PR advice and got out in front of it. All of this took, I think, 10 days to execute.
Wow.
And what we saw was that in the first 10 days, stock price went down, but by the end of the year, the stock price was up 12%. So one could make a case that was fast decision making with long-term effects. But what I'll say is that in answering the question more directly about turnaround times and expectations, the likelihood of achieving any kind of positive quantitative return is a lot less likely if you don't measure than if you do. So whether returns come in 10 days or instantly or 10 months, I think it's not the focus. It shouldn't be the primary focus of when will we receive a return, because you may not be able to attribute every shift to this decision about measuring public relations. But the absence of data in public relations decision making will almost certainly
Hmm.
leave questions about the degree to which it worked, if it worked at all.
Hmm. All of this discourse surrounding data and technology, especially concepts like AI that have sort of been fun topics at all of the PR and communications events. Some say that these things they sort of point to a future in which technology may replace some of the roles fulfilled by by PR practitioners and comms practitioners today, and I know that many of us, as we struggle to sort of see this sort of a future actually playing out. So a question for you, Mark, alongside technology, what does the role of the practitioner look like in the future? Will it, for example, be more focused on understanding the sort of mechanics of different technologies, or will it be more focused on developing and cultivating deep industry expertise to complement the tools?
Public relations historically has been a relationship business. It has not been a particularly innovative sector. The innovations come from service providers like the release distribution companies, the database companies, the online platforms, and like that. Very few agencies have succeeded in that kind of technological innovation. Now, in writing the book, there's a chapter devoted to technology, and I expected technology to lead me to write more about artificial intelligence. And after 3 days of solid research, looking everywhere, Googling every combination, I could not find one practical example of artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of examples of machine learning, but not true artificial intelligence where the machines are thinking for themselves. Now, this is I think this is a dangerous place for public relations because the expectation when people buy these technologies is that they are plugging in an insights engine, and with a button, they're going to have some kind of epiphany. That doesn't happen that way. These technologies are fast and consistent, but they're utterly stupid. They have to be trained, and the training takes a lot of time and resources to introduce dictionaries. And even a concept like innovation, for example, a typical corporate reputation attribute can have thousands of descriptions. It doesn't always appear explicitly and verbatim as innovation and only innovation. A number of patents or some new technology, whatever the story is. There's many, many ways to say it, and it changes even by sector. So at a corporate level, there's innovation. At a corporate level, there might be something like quality of products and services. But if you're working for a car company, quality of products and services is going to be safety, comfort, fuel efficiency. And if you're a fast food restaurant chain, those attributes don't come into it. It's nutrition and fun and convenience and price maybe. So very different attributes. Now, the technology doesn't know that until it's trained to know that, and it's exhaustive for that reason. So I didn't find anything about artificial intelligence, and yet I have experienced a lot of frustration among clients, big companies and small, that there's a lot more work to this than what they thought. Now, while the technology is fast and accessible and stupid, human expertise is sometimes slower, maybe it's inexact, but it can produce results that are absolutely brilliant. And it's only through the combination of the technology and the uniquely human elements that bring real value. So while artificial intelligence isn't here yet, all I found were marketing claims. I couldn't find real case studies or peer-reviewed studies, except for one, and it's in the book. The likelihood that PR will be replaced by technology is remote. There was a study in doing all this Google searching. I found a ranking of industries and professions that are most and least likely to be replaced through artificial intelligence. So what I've described to you is, speed, accessibility, and also consistency in this case. So for producing mass production of cars or whatever, artificial intelligence has a big role to play. But within professions, not as big. There was a ranking, I don't remember the source of it, but there was a ranking of professions that said accounting is the most likely to be replaced by artificial intelligence. Public relations was the least. So it's not a threat to public relations because what we do is so uniquely human, and even though there are robots in journalism, rewriting press releases for baseball box scores or earnings results, there hasn't yet really been it has to begin still with the original press release that the bot rewrites. That press release of earnings is still coming from a human. So I don't see the threat as being either immediate or even long term. And I think it's because public relations is so uniquely human.
Thanks for that perspective, Mark. Let's talk a little bit about 2020, and I think this will be our last question for today. 2020 changed so much for us in public relations and communications, Mark, and I think it's fair to say that there is probably a bigger spotlight on the profession than ever before, whether it's due to the debates surrounding misinformation and disinformation, the sort of ever importance role of ESG, environmental social governance, or even the importance of innovative internal communications efforts as a response to everyone working remotely. So, you know, taking all of this change into account, Mark, what would your reflections be on the past year in public relations and communications, and what do you think that means for 2021?
I think 2020 will have to be one of the most momentous years in the history of public relations. And the reason I say that is because of the speed and the frequency of sensitive social issues emerging in business and in our culture. So when you think about Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Capitol insurrection, GameStop as another one, where there were these very volatile situations that were very sensitive. And at the same time, there's an undercurrent of expectation among society that business has to reflect the interests of more than just shareholders. So Business Roundtable in 2019, at the end of 2019, redefined its purpose and said that the purpose of a business is to serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Then there was frustration, and Business Roundtable is comprised of, I think, 200, 300 CEOs, American CEOs of the largest companies. So there was this expectation that now business was going to act in a more socially responsible way, but there was no great evidence of this for months, and there was criticism that there was a disconnect between the claim and the execution. Now, when we first encountered Me Too and Black Lives Matter in this sequence of big social issues, very sensitive, and they touched on CEOs and companies' desire to take a position, like an ethical position of what's right and what's not right. But it was compounded because these issues are so sensitive that there was more concern about getting it wrong than making a statement, taking a position, and whether it was exactly right or somewhat right, it would cause paralysis. Now, in all of these, in each of these instances, and I think it compounded over time, that by the time the Capitol insurrection happened, big companies with serious interests in government took immediate action, like Lockheed Martin was one. There were others where it wasn't just traditionally activist companies like Ben and Jerry's coming up with a flavor to and to donate money to support social issues. This was Lockheed Martin, where the U.S. government is, it's got to be its biggest customer, pulling funding from Republican Congress people who denied President Biden's election. They pulled the money fast and made clear statements that this is what they were doing. Other companies decided to pull back from funding either party, and then there were others who chose not do things, and there were a few that doubled down on their support of those Congress people. Now, in every case, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Capitol insurrection, there was and particularly in GameStop, it felt like there was organizations wanted to be on the record of having an opinion, whether they were directly affected by GameStop or indirectly. There's enough companies in financial services and retail and whatever to have an opinion, and they wanted that opinion to be heard. These are like emotional reactions, but they had to be tempered. And in the end, the media was very favorable, traditional and social media, very favorable to those companies who took strong positions quickly, which I hope will encourage companies to act in similar ways along, in their, take strong ethical positions. Now, that comes back to public relations, because these issues are so sensitive, and even though CEOs are, very successful business people, they may not feel qualified to articulate that strong position directly and in an unfiltered way. So I think it elevated the role of public relations as chief communications officer to help the company and the CEO refine their position, articulate their position, and to broadcast their position. So in that way, I think public relations has emerged as or reestablished, reaffirmed its essential role in communicating. Now that society expects companies to take a position, rewards companies that take a position, and it helps leadership align any gap between the expectation, their individual desires, and their ability to execute. And I don't think that'll change, especially because these issues continue to emerge, and and so the need for this kind of communication council will only increase.
There's no doubt about that, Mark. And I think we're in for a great year. I think 2021 will include, in parallel to the areas that you mentioned, uh, an increased level of activity from the standard setting organizations and the research setting organizations like IPR and AMEC. I think we're headed into an era which I like to think of as the great enlightenment for PR agencies, communications research companies, etc. Everything I think is moving in a really exciting direction, and you combine these sort of societal realizations with the advancements in technology. I think it's an exciting time to be in public relations. It's even more exciting time to be in measurement and evaluation. And with that, Mark, I think we have come to the conclusion of our time today. As always, thank you so much for sharing your insights with the IPR community. The Measurement Commission will sort of continue down this path of sharing insights in this video series, and hopefully we'll have you on here again very soon.
Wonderful. In closing, let me say thanks again. That there's the greatest free source of information is found on the Institute website. It's www.institute4pr.org, and a great resource, very accessible material there to help guide practitioners in their quest to deliver a positive return on their communications investment.
Excellent. And I think that's it for today. So thank you again for tuning in. We'll be back to you in about 2.5 weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.